Aotearoa, everyone. Ko Frian Wadia Toko Ingoa. Welcome to our NATINA korero today with Emma Hunter. I will get us underway with a karakia. Karakia te matanga. Manakitia tene hui, manakitia tene ropu, manakitia tene whānau. Tai noa ki tēnei kaupapa. Arahina nā korero, arahina nā patai, arahina nā ture nei, kia puta ai te manamananga. So bless this meeting, bless this group, bless this family as we come together for this gathering. Guide the discussions, guide the questions, guide the intent so that we move onwards to greater understanding. So welcome, everybody. Without further ado, let's introduce Emma. So Emma is Deputy Principal at Wakefield Primary, and you have actually worked in the secondary space as well, Emma, haven't you? So you've got a wealth of experience across the secondary and primary spaces. And the other thing, I don't know, you're a board member with Kingslea School, and you have also founded and you've been on the BrainHug Trust. So you are the chair and founder of the BrainHug Trust. And we would love to hear a little more about that, Emma, today. Where did your journey start? You know, how did your interest in the space unfold? And also all the different roles and hats sort of that you're wearing and what you're doing in all these different spaces. So yeah, we would love to hear from you. Just a little introduction about yourself. Welcome, Emma, and thank you for taking the time to come and join us. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Frian. So I'll just introduce myself first. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Meriden ina rangi tukutūranga waiwai no whakatū ahau. Ko Glazier te hapu, ko Scott tuku hoa tānei, ko Alex tuku tamahine, ko Emma tuku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Thank you again, Frian, and everyone for being here. It's very humbling, a little bit embarrassing actually, because I don't feel like I'm doing anything any different to anybody else except getting stuck in and doing the mahi and doing what we should be doing. So thank you so much for inviting me. It means a lot. In my mahi, I referred to being born in a little village called Meriden in England. And that village is literally in the heart of England. It's the centre of England. And in that village, there is a little monument. It's just little, and it's opposite the fish and chip shop and the bakery and opposite the hairdressers. And it sits there and it says Meriden, the heart of England. And I never really thought anything about being born there until recently, and it was probably in the last 5 years. So I've grown up mostly in New Zealand, in Nelson, which is the centre of New Zealand. And I walk up a hill here in New Zealand and walk up to the monument in the centre of New Zealand. And in the last 5 years, as I've really come to understand trauma aware, trauma transformative education, I remember one day just going, centre of New Zealand, centre of England, heart of the community. And I just had this like epiphany. And I was like, that's what it is. It's this journey is about community. It's about being in the heart of the community. It's knowing your community. It's being transformative within the community. It's community level responding. And so suddenly my mihi and where I came from, my tūranga waiwai, it took a whole different meaning for me. And I think that was really eye-opening for me. And it's become such a special journey for me. So I always refer to the journey that I'm on, and honestly, it's just the start of my journey, because I learn something new every day, is about community level responding and learning from everyone around me. And it takes me back to the Pākehā whakatauki around it takes a village to raise a child. And I'm always being led back to that. So that's just a little bit about who I am and where I come from is community.
Thanks, Emma. That is absolutely beautiful. And you are so right. For me, the sense of community and the importance of community came about when we started facing a lot of hardships initially, when we started the journey with my oldest son, who is profoundly deaf, has a genetic condition that is very rare, and we couldn't get access to supports from the public funding system. And I was blown away with how much the community stepped
Mm,
up and just surrounded us with support, helped us with fundraising. People I didn't know, strangers, had sort of rallied around us and supported us when they sort of, heard of our story. And I had people who were going out there and sort of, doing the work and getting the context and stuff. And I was really blown away at that point. And it really made me understand the power of community
yeah.
and how much a community can help and support people, because we were going through that initial stage of grief, understanding what this meant for
Mm-hmm,
our child,
mm-hmm,
um,
mm-hmm.
making sense of a 1-year-old, 2-year-old having
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
is so uncertain and all of that. So that was my first understanding of community, and how important it is. And as we've journeyed along the way, I've always thought, people come and go, and people around us change, but what's important is that community around us, and it's
Mm,
how we support each other, how we
yeah.
really uplift each other. And it's very common in the parent space as well. So
Mm,
parents of disabled children, you know, come together and you get that sense of connection, sense of understanding. And it's really, really powerful how they can support each other and uplift each other.
yeah, I agree. And I think you're so right from the parent whānau space. It can be really lonely without that sense of belonging, that sense of whānau
Mm,
ngātanga, which is so, so crucial in that journey. And often parents feel disenfranchised and don't have that sense of belonging. I think that's
yeah,
really true.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
And the
it
other
is.
thing is, one of the 6 trauma-informed principles is peer support. And
Mhm.
that's what it is, isn't it?
It
Peer
really
support,
is.
sort of, having that community there for you,
Yeah,
supporting you, understanding you.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
If you don't feel like you
yeah.
belong,
Yes.
that you just it
Yeah.
sets you up on a
Mm,
path
yeah.
this way rather than this way,
Yes,
potentially,
absolutely.
potentially. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Emma, tell us a little bit about in the education space, where
Mm,
and how did your journey start with
yeah.
regards to trauma-informed
Yeah, sure.
approaches? What
It's
triggered that for you?
yeah, it was definitely, I like many people's journeys, it was very much around the mountain, down a cavern,
Yeah.
down a deep dark hole. Nothing's ever taken a nice straight trajectory or even up
Uh,
trajectory. It's like I've had more failures than successes. I still do. So it definitely hasn't been a beautiful line, and it still isn't. So um I left high school, went to university, did the normal thing, and I was, a real nerdy student. I was, very conscientious. Got to university and went with the best intention of leaving as an educational psychologist. I thought, this is me, got it sorted, and I actually hated it. I hated it. But
wow.
I was like, this sucks, man. It was so structured, and I just thought it just didn't sit with me. And I remember it was in Otago, and oh man, because I was such a good student, and it was like way too much fun to be had at Otago University. And
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
really young, like I wasn't even 18, I was 17. I was like, man, this is cool. And so I probably partied too much. And but then in my second year, I discovered education and child development, and I was like, hey man, this is cool. This is pretty awesome. So I ended up shifting my degree from psychology to education and child development, not teaching. Still, that wasn't anything that struck me. And so went down that path, did nothing with my degree. I was like, went to Australia. You know, I'm like, my parents were pretty disappointed because I was like a number one nerd child. And I just went, whatever, the world is too exciting. And then it was probably, went to Australia and spent a bit of time traveling around and ended up in communities in Broome and Darwin and started to understand a little bit more around First Nations communities and the cultural gap. And my eyes were opened, and I was kind of devastated when I came back to New Zealand at what I had experienced, because I didn't realize, I was so naive. I did not realize the impact, the trauma, the intergenerational trauma of how First Nations people were treated and how far ahead we were in New Zealand even then. And now it's changed. It's still changed here. It's better here. Yeah, that impacted me a lot as a young person traveling, and particularly in the Northern Territory. It was in my face, and it hurt a lot, some of the stuff that I saw. So I came back to New Zealand and I worked in health for a little bit in disability support services. And I still wasn't really doing anything with the degree that I had. And then I met my husband, who's still my husband now, and we ended up having a daughter. And when she was 6 months old, we were both like, yeah, we should probably do something with our tertiary studies. So he went and studied nursing and I went and studied teaching. We had a 6-month-old baby, so we both did postgraduate diplomas. People thought we were completely bonkers, but we just felt that calling. So and the rest kind of it went really fast from there, and because that only took a year and we had a little baby. He went into full-time nursing. I didn't go into full-time teaching initially. I started off part-time, but I started off intermediate, and I ended up working at a local intermediate here for 10 years. And within the first 2 years of my teaching career, it was the disability, the special education space that I very much leaned into. And within the first couple of years, I was head of learning support, SENCO, and it was at a time where children were going to separate spaces for special education support, and that didn't sit right. So we did a complete overhaul and a complete review and worked on a mainstream system. And I remember that was my real first experience as a professional of being disliked. And because teachers suddenly didn't have it easy. Suddenly teachers were challenged with having to meet the complex needs of all learners, that they didn't just get the kids that would sit down and they could teach to the curriculum level and chronological age of those children in the class. And it took me a while to figure out why people were treating me differently. Again, naive. It was another experience of being ever so slightly naive. So that was really tough. That was hard. So what I did, and this was, I guess, when I realized that if I walked the walk and talked the talk, people would, I don't like the word follow, but maybe see that I was going to lead by example. So what I did is we call it a pod class. I mean, I hate all these stupid names we have for things these days. But I actually said, well, hey, look, I would never say you need to do this if I'm not going to do this. So I actually had 6 complex needs kids in my class. And this was, man, it would have only been about 2007, way before we had lots of complex needs kids in our class. And so I modeled it. I'm not going to say you need to do it. I'll do it first. And so then we got more, it's that kind of front carriage, middle carriage, back carriage. More people came on board and thought, well, actually, she's not talking crap because she's doing it herself. And it was bloody hard, actually. It was really tough. So it was a good experience. And from there, I realized, I became more and more excited about the complex needs space, and I began to learn. I was always learning. It wasn't just about, and I don't mean just about special needs. I could see there was something else. There was something else sitting there. There was something else going on with our families. There was reasons why children were struggling to come to school, to get out of the car in the morning, and I didn't understand what that was. I was like, what's going on here? So I just started asking questions and connecting more with families and connecting more with
Yeah.
families, connecting more with families, and starting to get the stories. So for me, it was about finding out the backstory. And I remember having a really difficult conversation one day with our principal, because he said to me, and it turned out to be a bit of an argy-bargy, honestly, because he felt I was putting too much emphasis on connecting with families, and I needed to concentrate more on the teachers and on the children. And I'm like, just again, I was really confused. I've spent a lot of my career confused, because things that seemed to me were really logical, like surely parents are the experts about their kids, or they know, or surely connecting with the families is going to make our job easier. Like really, I was like, I must look actually dumb half the time, because I'm like, no, it doesn't really make sense to me. So we did end up in some quite heated debates, but through connecting with families, I noticed children would flourish, and you couldn't argue with that, right? So that again, people came on board with that. So from there, I thought, I'd really love to embark on more of a leadership journey, because I could see some shifts in thinking. So that's when I was fortunate enough to be able to start my Master of Educational Leadership. I began there, and it was a bit of these things, they become a bit of a burden. And one night, I remember, it was a camp. I was with a camp, and it was a really tough year 7-8 class. And I was it was at the camp, and it was like 2 a.m. I had an assignment due, and I was madly tapping. I was thinking, oh, this is bonkers. I can't keep this up. So I applied for a sabbatical, and I was really fortunate enough to get a year's sabbatical to finish my master's degree. And I did. It was 2015. I got the year's leave, and I didn't know what to research, and I had a few kids that were really struggling to come to school. And I thought, I did a bit of scratching below the surface around research, around attendance and engagement, and there really wasn't a whole lot in New Zealand. So I did my research around attendance and engagement, and who knew it would become such a major thing? So that was where I based my master's research. And so after that year, I honestly thought I'd go back to intermediate or primary. But funnily enough, a position came up at one of our local high schools, and they were having some issues around attendance and engagement, particularly with really high risk, vulnerable young girls that were just tipping out of school. Some of their attendance rates were like 7-11%. And they were engaging in some really high-risk behaviours in the community. And it was around the time synthetic cannabis was a really big thing in New Zealand. And man, they were poor. It was some risky stuff, and stuff that I hadn't seen before, but they were really interested in the work that I'd done. And so we were able to kind of marry up our thinking. So I was quite nervous about going from that intermediate to secondary school space, but they were so supportive. It was amazing. And I actually ended up in the secondary school space for 8 years. Wow. And I've only just left it, which I loved it. Miss it. It was awesome.
Tell me, within the secondary space, because what I found is inclusion, even supporting our kids, sort of, we can scrape by in the primary, intermediate sort of years. Secondary, it just feels like if you have a child with high complex needs, that's absolute no-go. And you must be in a segregated,
Yeah.
unit, hub, seating, whatever.
Yeah.
Personally, and this is just my thinking and, perspective from everything I hear and see from other parents and my own lived experiences. Secondary schools, because they're large, they have the resources to sort of pool and have a segregated space and sort of, tend to um, just set that up. And then that becomes the space for all the children with high complex needs, and sort of, they end up being segregated. And that's the way it's just done for everybody. And
Yeah.
if you question that norm, and if you say, no, actually, let's do inclusion, you get pushback saying it's not possible for a child with such a high level of, learning needs, stuff like that. What do you think is the difference? Why are primary schools able to, you know, um, do some of that, even if it's not happily, unwillingly sometimes, but they still manage to do it, compared to secondary schools? They really struggle. Why is that? What do you think is
Um,
keeping them
if
from doing
I'm brutally honest, and I can tell you how I managed some of it at secondary school. So I did some quite radical things. Again, I
it?
wasn't particularly popular, but it didn't matter because the kids are who matters, and parent,
Yes.
um, is I think the difference is that in primary school there is no choice. They are under the age of 14 and they have to be at
Yeah.
school. So that's a really big difference. There aren't
Mhm.
early exemptions. There aren't opportunities for, moving on to alternative tertiary options or alternative
True.
education in primary
True.
school. So you do not have a choice. Plus, your class is your class and you're given your class. At secondary school, you can have up to 8 teachers over a fortnight timetable, sometimes even a week timetable. So with some of the hybrid timetables, certainly that even I was responsible for doing in secondary school, because I was at head of learning support again at secondary school, and that like if that teacher, didn't have a relationship, the child wasn't turning up to that class, we could manipulate the timetable. So it was a part-time timetable. You can't manipulate that at primary school. You've got
Yeah.
that child.
Yeah.
You've got that child, and we have to work with that.
Yeah.
So it's
Um,
different.
do you think it's the relationship in terms of those connections, relationships? You spend a lot more time with the kids,
Mm,
as a primary school
yeah,
teacher. You're, there for all the subjects. You're there the whole day mostly, with that child. And the other thing I found was, you mentioned you connected with families, and that really helped to shift things along
yeah.
for the students. Um, and again, in secondary school, families don't
Mm,
always have that connection.
no, no.
And I know families are busy, and sometimes it's just not possible but a lot of our neurodivergent children, their families, disabled children families, are really keen to connect,
They
but
are.
opportunities
Yeah.
are there in secondary.
I think one of the complexities with high school is there are so many people connecting with families. Like you've got deans, you've got
Yeah,
classroom, you've got so many classroom teachers. Sometimes you might have
yeah,
a senior leader as well connecting in, or you've got a head of a house connecting, and you've got a sports coordinator. There's so many different people within the secondary context that parents are often overwhelmed, and they need a one point of call, particularly if you've got a neurodivergent
yeah,
child with special needs, with health needs, whatever that might be. So you still need that point of contact. You need almost that primary space, primary type setting, or a nurture type space within that high school context. And that's certainly what I try to emulate within the high school space, without it being an exclusion or separate. You're right, it is hubs, or the special needs unit, or whatever it might be dubbed. So there were two things that I was able to do, and again, I'm not, neither were perfect and neither were entirely successful.
yeah,
And one was, we were fortunate to have an old villa on our school grounds that had been gifted to the school. And what I did is I proposed to the board of trustees, the principal, and the person that gifted the villa, because it wasn't being used, it was sitting there empty, that we turn it into a nurture space, that we use it as a place that children who needed it, and they were kids that were mostly from big T trauma backgrounds, complex trauma backgrounds, and who did have complex learning needs as well, could go there in the morning. We can sort out their uniform. They can have some kai as a place to connect with families. It was a place that agencies could meet. And it was just slightly to the side of the school ground. So it wasn't like everyone could see the services coming in and see how many people needed to connect with those young wahine. So it was a nice space. The problem with it, it was great. It was great for 3 years. The complexity, as with most things, was sustainable funding. And that was, so it was good, but it wasn't good because it was a standalone building and it was gifted. It didn't come within our property funding, like our 5YA or any.
Yeah.
So we didn't get money to support that building. I was able to get grants and I was able to lobby for community funding to support it. But, the toilet got clogged up or there was, electrical issues. We were covering all of that as a school. So that was a problem. The other problem was, it took a little bit of extra staffing and it was not really that sustainable. So we lobbied. It was, and I'm trying to remember my timeline of years, and I might get it wrong, but I'm fairly sure 2018. I'm fairly sure it was 2017, which was the year before, or the year that the Labour government, the Jacinda Ardern government, was elected. And Jacinda Ardern came to visit because we were experiencing a lot of success, and we'd had some of the children, or rangatahi, their attendance had gone up from, I had one young person, her attendance had gone up from 11% to 30%. Massive. It was massive for her. And she was coming to us and then going into mainstream classes where she could. And I had another young person who had an ankle bracelet. She was coming to school. She was going to classes. She'd spent some time in Te Punawai, that youth justice facility in Christchurch, come back, and we were transitioning her, and I remember going down to visit her in Te Punawai, and recall the deputy principal saying to me that I was the only mainstream teacher ever to have visited a young person in one of their youth justice facilities ever to transition back into a mainstream school. That sat with me. I thought, hey man, that's not cool. We need to change that, which is, well, lead on. That's how I ended up in my journey at Kingslea School, which is our youth justice and care and protection schools in New Zealand. So anyway, Jacinda Ardern came, visited the kids. It was huge. It was 2 weeks before the election, so it was just massive. And she was like, man, this rocks. This is awesome. She sent Chris Hipkins a few weeks later after they got in. This rocks. This is awesome. Nothing happened from there. Admire everything they've done. It's great. But what did happen was that they blanketed a lot of the supports, like learning support coordinators, and tried to appease lots of different areas. But what they observed, and this was the feedback that I got, which I took on board, was that the young people were doing well. The young people were doing well. And that didn't attract the funding. And that kind of annoyed me.
And that's the way the whole education system is, where the minute you start doing well, the supports are pulled away. And the supports aren't valued for, what they bring, what they add, until it's all lost and things are falling apart,
That's right.
And it's just not right. One of the things that I think we don't talk about, educational trauma. It never gets talked about,
No.
and yet it is so relevant and exists for so many of our children and in so many different ways. So when we think about sort of educational trauma, sometimes we think about all the big stuff that might happen in education that causes the trauma, the big bullying incidents or the big sort of, incidents of stand downs and corporal punishment or restraint and, exclusions and all those big things. But, the everyday stuff, the lack of support, the language that gets used, children being told you're, just not gonna make
you're
it,
silly. Oh,
not
stop being
worth it,
silly. Yeah.
all those little things we say without thinking can actually really impact our kids. And it just never gets talked about. I'm wondering where and how, because Emma, I know you've said a few times that you've not been popular because you've sort of tried to make radical changes and you've tried to push the boundaries and shift
Yeah.
the way things are done. And I think as a parent, that was the case. I was probably never a popular parent with educators and schools because I always push the boundaries in terms of I would literally get told we don't do this or we've never done that. And I had to just go, well, there's always a first time. Let's do it together,
Yeah.
How have you managed to get those attitudinal shifts, the mindset shift, that need to happen for teachers, for staff? How have you sort of managed to do that? I know you've done the role modeling.
Yeah.
What else as a
Yeah.
senior leadership team member were you able to
Yeah.
do? Was it professional learning development, mentorship? What kind of things, were you able to um, put in place, and what was effective and what wasn't effective?
Yeah. I think there's probably two things that I can give you as examples that I still do. And one of them is I show vulnerability. I don't like, I have to, if I talk about, when we co-regulate with young people with the calm and the storm, we have to be that calm. But I'm also really cognizant to show that I can't always be that person. I'm not always that person. That I am not perfect. I'm not superhuman. That I have bad days too, and I need help, and I need others to help me regulate. I need someone to co-regulate with me. I'm not perfect, and I don't have all the answers. That we must show our vulnerability as leaders in this field, and actually say, I don't know what to do. I need help, and that's gone a long way. Because sometimes when we try and be we're that duck on the water, we look really smooth, but underneath we're paddling. It's okay to show the fear. It's okay. Bloody hard to do, but I've learned by doing it, you bring more people on board. I used to think I had to be stoic. I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember years ago when I was sort of really starting out in that advocacy space around inclusion. And there were times where I used to attend a meeting, with professional advocates. And there were things that would trigger me, and I would just break down
Mm.
in a room full of people. Here
Mm.
I'm supposed to be sort of, advocating and standing up and doing things to shift,
Yeah.
make change happen. And I was breaking down. And I remember I used to feel so embarrassed. I'd be like, oh my gosh, can't believe I did this, And I'd be like, I have to stop doing this, And I remember another parent who was also in the space, and she said to me, she said, Fian, don't apologize. Because she says this shows what we really go through as
Yeah.
parents. And she said, you know, all of us want to break down. Um, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to show what the real challenges are and to be vulnerable and sort of, uh,
Absolutely.
And it's true, and I didn't realize at that time, I didn't know anything about, trauma-informed approaches.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that
yeah,
I was in that constant sort of fight flight state.
yeah.
And I was
Absolutely. You
because
don't
so
know.
easily no. And it's hilarious. I can say this now and I can laugh about it, but there was a phase where the word principal or deputy principal would really get me
Yeah.
tense. My
Don't
muscles,
blame you.
everything. And if I was in a room with any principal, I wouldn't even know. I would
Mm,
just directly go into that
yeah.
high alert, space. And it's funny, I have so many principals who are absolutely fabulous friends, that I know. And
It's human.
but I went through this phase where I was really, really, just that, it triggered me because of
Yeah.
the experiences we had around discrimination. And knowing, understanding how do you support yourself, how do you regulate yourself, has been so valuable for me, so to speak. And also the healing helps,
Mhm.
the it's not just the in the moment, how do I manage it, but um the longer term sort of healing
Yeah.
really helps and supports to sort of move on and move
Mm,
ahead. And I wonder, I do think for teachers as well, on the other side of it, when they are um, in classrooms, uh, how much of the behaviors and what happens could easily be triggering them, because
and
past
yeah.
experiences, and how do they get supported to deal with,
Mm.
and then
Well,
to
when their nervous system is offline because they're getting
yeah,
triggered, and I can see it, it's contagious. We know emotions are contagious,
yeah,
and you get that emotional contagion, and I see that. And so it's working together and it's working in that non-judgmental space. And I think that that's ultimately, where I think we're all coming together as
yeah,
to how can we that is for me probably the biggest thing right now in the work that I'm doing is supporting teachers, supporting the adults to bring the calm,
yeah,
but checking that they're okay. Because if adults are okay, the kids are okay. And at the moment, adults aren't that great. They're not feeling awesome. We're losing teachers, and it worries me. And I guess if my message is, and I can go more into how what I'm doing now and all of that, but you asked it how I if I talked about vulnerability.
mm,
The other thing that I do to overcome the naysayers, and oh my God, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. I've had to get over imposter syndrome. I've had
mm,
to remember we are all human. Lead with the heart, put
mm,
human first.
yeah,
I take my teacher hat off. I
mm,
don't care about deputy principal. I don't care about all of those. I don't care about any of that. And I say to everyone, I am a human first. And now I'm a mum, a mum. And it's just take down those barriers and let's actually put the human back on the table
yeah,
and lead with kindness, lead with the heart,
yeah.
and let's just start again and actually truly listen to each other. And when you bring those barriers down and you just actually create that sense of felt safety for the adults as well, it's amazing what can come from there. I'm seeing teachers that are so distressed and so distraught, and they can't create a sense of felt safety for their students when they're in that dysregulated state and their nervous system is flipping out all over the shop.
Um, it's that whole thing about um, do you feel seen? Do you feel
Yeah,
heard? Do you
yeah,
feel valued? Is there someone there to comfort you, soothe you, support you when you
yeah,
need it? It's so important. And I think there are so many little ways we can do it in. We talk about neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches. But when you kind of really get to know some of it is so much of common sense.
mm,
And like you say, it's just kindness. It's the basic stuff that you can do, in terms of
Absolutely.
and showing your humanity. I remember I was on a school board for 2 terms, and one of the things we had as a board, we were looking at how do we make sure our teachers are feeling really valued. We were going through that whole phase of, we've got less teachers, hard to find relievers, all of that stuff. How do we make the school a place where teachers want to work, teachers feel valued? And sometimes it was just little things that we used to do for them, like, throw a morning tea, have little notes, you know, telling each teacher how well they were doing and what they were doing with the chalky, and sharing that, inviting them. One of the things our board had done was really cool. We decided, instead of spending money on just ourselves and going out for Christmas, whatever, end of year celebration, we would actually have a barbecue with all our staff. And so, they were part of that celebration. Those little things really made a difference. And you could see the teachers feeling really valued. And the other things, so these were the little things we were doing, but we also realized we could shift policies. And I think this is really important, for people who are board of trustees sitting on that leadership space, giving our teachers more choice and control over how they were supported. Like, I remember the PLD budgets that we had were sort of initially just predetermined. You had the budget, it was used for, this big professional learning development that was decided, not by individual teachers. It was pre-decided by, the principal and the leadership team. And that was it. And they never had any support on an ongoing basis. And so we actually, as a board, shifted our policy so that teachers had the choice and control throughout the year when they needed. So certain budget was set for that, certain was for, school-wide training. And it was a huge thing. I remember teachers used to, individual teachers would apply for things, and then they would come and say, oh, this is so nice, we can choose what we want. This has been so valuable for us. And I really started seeing those shifts and those little ways in which teachers were being supported. And so really, I think it's so important what you're saying. We focus on the child, we focus on, community, but we don't really focus enough on our teachers. How do we support them? How do we make sure they are seen, they are heard, and they are valued? And we've got to do so much better in that space.
Yeah, we do. And, like, I try, not to get too depressed at some of the things that I see online, but I do see some teachers posting things that they're driving to work in tears. They want to leave the workforce. I saw a statistic today around we have 50% less teachers applying for Teachers College. I know that we have a very low intake in the Nelson region here, and that worries me. It does worry me that this is not becoming an attractive field. And so we want to make this an attractive space because our children need teachers. It's really that simple. So what can we do to enhance that? And I guess that's really my dream, is to inspire the next generation of teachers and make our environment better for them and enhance not literacy, not maths curriculum, but a trauma transformative curriculum, so that we can then bring our prefrontal cortex online to engage with the maths and the literacy. But until then, it's at the moment, it's just around the wrong way. And that's for me the next step and the next phase. And that, if I go back just a little bit, because once I had, after the work that I'd done with the alternative education around the house, and after just to take a wee loop around, lockdown had happened, and that's when the attendance issues really, took a big spike. But we'd run out of money to keep our alternative space going, and that's when everybody goes, oh, we really wish we'd kept this going. Run out of money now, I get the value of hindsight, and I'm like, oh, it's my life story. So what I thought, well, actually, I've got a whole bunch of connections from having run this. So I remember getting really frustrated and getting on the phone to heaps of people, and Oranga Tamariki were amazing because they were getting sick of Section 53 referrals for non-attendance after COVID, and we're like, we have to do something different. And so I was fortunate enough to get some funding for a pilot project around attendance and engagement. So we did a little pilot around, again, I wasn't popular, getting kids out of school who weren't attending school, but showing them what opportunities were available to them beyond the school setting to motivate them to come to school. So it was around looking at what industries were around, what opportunities were in our community. And if you go to school, imagine what you could do when you leave school. So it was kind of this really exciting way of introducing the community to the children. And so then they had supports to go to school, but also then motivated to engage in that. And that was a term project. And we saw such massive shift in attendance that when the second lockdown happened, all those children came back to school because we stayed in touch with them. And so we were able to keep that project going and extend it to other schools and bring Te Whātua Ora on board, bring local government on board with that, and a whole lot of other different support networks. That lasted about 3 years. And then once again, central government went, oh, we've got attendance service now, and we'll look at the attendance strategy and we'll do a one-size-fits-all approach. So that I think I must go on 3-year cycles. I think it's a thing with me. So that came to an end because there was no longer the need for that really targeted local resource. That's okay. I'm used to giving things a go, getting the evidence, and moving on to the next thing, which has led me to where I am now. With one of the findings that that came out of it was Aroha Kotahi was our project, and that was we had before lovely Suwara Gardner passed away. He came and visited us when he was CE of Oranga Tamariki, and he said, oh, this is leading with the heart. This is love first. And that's where the name Aroha Kotahi was coined first. So love first and love in the community. So that was amazing. So from there, one of the findings that came out of Aroha Kotahi was every child had an emotional regulation plan. And that plan was based on the 5-point scale, which is a UK model, but also the work of Dr. Judith Howard. And so we developed an individual plan for children. They used it at school and they also used it at home. So it was that real cross-pollination and working really closely with families, working really closely with children, developing it together with families, together with the kids, together with the schools. And so everybody was using this. And so it was co-regulating, it was regulating together. And the real finding that came out of it was through that co-regulation, through that understanding those strategies, through understanding our brain, through understanding different focused attention strategies that we could use to ground ourselves, the kids were able to engage with learning in one way or another. So that's what led us. That's what led us to developing and moving into the BrainHug Trust with a real focus on developing I don't like to necessarily use the word common language, but a shared language, emotional regulation tool that's accessible and free, accessible and free for everybody to adapt and use to their context and for their whānau families and schools.
So Emma, tell us a bit more about the BrainHug Trust. What are you doing right now? Where are you headed? What are your sort of hopes in terms of moving forward with it? Because you're also looking at studying.
Yeah.
So, You've got lots of things happening.
I probably, you know, if somebody were to put their hand up and come and diagnose me, I could sit somebody somewhere probably on the ADHD spectrum, because I managed to juggle a lot of balls, but I love it.
Oh, absolutely. I get that. I get that.
So the BrainHug Trust, it was decided. So we had a steering group with Aotearoa, and it was the people, it was the groups that I mentioned, like Oranga Tamariki, Ministry of Education, Te Whātua Order, local council, Sport New Zealand, RTLB, different schools. We all decided that the putia, the money that we had left over, because it was all charitable money, and what was left would go into a charitable trust. And we would look at building an emotional regulation tool. When I went to, my daughter lives in Australia, she lives in Brisbane now. So when I was in Brisbane, I had hooked up a meeting to connect with Dr. Judith Howard. And I was having a chat with her. It was a real privilege. She showed me around, and it was a lovely meeting. And I said, I'd really love to tap into your thinking around these ideas around an emotional regulation tool. We've been using your work and blah, 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 and would love to do this. And she looked at me like I was a real dick. And I was like, I'm really embarrassed. And she goes, why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
I thought, oh God, this is the most embarrassing moment of my life. And she said, it's already been done here. We've got she goes, why would you waste your time? Like, this could take 5 years, 6 years. We've reached 60,000 schools in Australia. We've got this, and she just gave me this business card and said, call this person. Anyway, I didn't want to do a cookie cutter thing, and I know Freya, we've spent lots of time talking about this. So I've been in touch with it's a beautiful human being called Sarah Ralston. She runs an amazing incredible, I'm not even going to call it a program, it's a resource, it's a professional development program. It's around supporting teachers, supporting professionals, and it's all around emotional regulation. It's based on Bruce Perry's neurosequential model, and she's trained with Bruce Perry. She's an incredible human being. So we are exploring with BrainHug and with Wakefield School and some other principals at the moment, and Oranga Tamariki and Ministry of Education and a few other people. I know, Freya, I've invited you, and I know there's some other people maybe on here this evening that I'll talk to as well, just to have a look at what Sarah can offer us and to adapt within the New Zealand context, because she's worked with First Nations people, she's worked with different communities across Australia. The other, I've been really, that's one idea, that's one concept. That's just one, it's like, what can we help? What can we give people? What tool can we give people? Free, and that's really important. Well, accessible for families. Because I remember when I was doing the emotional regulation plans, and I could give them to a family and they could whack it on their fridge and they could use this as a tool, and it would help in those moments of crisis. And it would give ideas. It would help bridge that gap and bridge that language. There were visuals there, and it was really gold. But the gold was in developing it with the families and developing that shared language. And oftentimes what we would identify is that the trigger was actually something a parent or a sibling was doing, and that would trigger a child. And it wasn't until you started unpacking that that's something that would happen within the family context, and then that would spill over into school. It was the conversations that would happen in developing the individualized tool that would help, but you needed a starting point.
One of the things that you're talking, and in the back of my head, I'm going, yeah, I totally get it. Investing the time into really connecting with everybody who is in the context of that child, and then unpacking, what's going on is so important. And sometimes I think as a parent, because I've got, children with high needs, I spend so much time digging up and
Mm-hmm.
asking questions to others, because my children can't talk and, communicate
Yeah.
with me and tell me
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on or what might be upsetting. And it's amazing how we've unpacked. And I'm always grateful for the time that people put into connecting
Yeah.
with me and coming back to me with those answers, whether it's teachers, teacher aides in schools,
Mm.
or recently I've been having this email conversation with our librarian, because my son goes to the library and he loves going there, picking up books and everything, which is fine. And he gets the book home, and then he's recently started ripping the covers off.
Right.
I think
Yes.
this is so not like him. Why is it happening?
Yeah. So
And
what's
I had
happening?
to like literally, and he goes off with the carer when I'm not at home and all that sort of stuff. And I've got all these emails going back and forth with the librarian. And they were so patient. They would answer my questions,
Mm.
and we're trying to figure out what's happening. And I ultimately figured out if there was a magazine with a little tear, he wants to rip it off because it's like
Ah.
with it. So, he's autistic, and for
Yeah.
this is a
Makes
half-done
sense, right?
job. You don't rip just so much. If you're gonna rip
No.
it, rip the whole thing off. So he rips the whole cover off.
Oh,
And
annoying. You just want to get rid of it. You want to.
so we've just figured, but it's taken us so much time to unpack something as little as this, because otherwise I'll keep getting fines from them.
That's cool. That's a good one. I like
But
that.
she was so patient. I was saying, "Oh, can you
Mm-hmm.
tell me this? Can you ask all these questions?" And we've, unpacked it. So I think the time to really
Time.
understand what's going on, and it doesn't matter, it's not just about our kids who can't talk, even our children
No.
who can speak.
And
It doesn't
little
matter.
children.
There's so
Yeah.
much, going on in their head. Whether they feel safe enough to talk and communicate or not, share what they're really feeling is another big thing. So it is so important to really take that time. And one of the things that I find challenging often, when parents do make that effort, they don't always get that connection. They don't always
No.
get the response and,
No.
the time that's needed. And I think it is so important to make time for these conversations, because then you can really understand, the
Yeah.
child, unpack what's going on, what's happening. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes things that have happened at school have triggered children at home, and sometimes children have had things happen
Mm.
at home that has then, sort of set them up for a bad day at school. So the home-school connection and partnership is so very important. It's absolutely crucial. Yes.
That's right. And it's about adapting plans as well. And, and if you've got to go back to them if a new behavior starts happening or there's a big event, you've got to go back and adapt. And, you've got to be flexible in that.
And I think this is where the whole thing also comes in, Emma, about not being too judgmental. I must say,
Mm.
um, when I started out on my journey as a parent, supporting, my children, sort of, working with schools, I think I was a lot more rigid in my thinking about how things should happen, or, how quickly they should happen, or all of that. As the years have gone by and I've sort of got to know my own children better, I've started understanding more about neuroscience, trauma-informed approaches. I'm really mindful now in terms of taking the time, being more
Yeah.
patient, understanding, realizing that we are all learning, and it's so important that we're all on the same side of the table or around the table rather than on different sides when we're supporting a child, because we've got to have that, unpack things, understand things, and then come to that shared understanding of how we're going to move forward and support our kids. So it is so, so important to work together, between
Mm. Mm.
absolutely.
Exactly. Oh, 100%, 100%. So I don't know. I guess the only other, I mean, there's a lot. I could keep talking forever, but really, my big thing now is, um, I spent so with BrainHug, so the practical thing is I'd love to, you know, offer something to people to help them build a website that has resources that parents can access, that educators can access, and, you know, that on a practical lens, but from a sustainable lens, because I've experienced trying lots of things like the different alternative education models that I've tried, the rangatahi and I wouldn't call anything a failure. It felt like it at the time, but it's actually those stepping stones to realizing what I need to do differently. It was building connections in those times and building relationships across the community. So I go back to that community is at the heart of it. So actually all of that was about developing stronger relationships, learning about strengthening my understanding about funding pathways, strengthening my understanding about never ever giving up, and about what the why is and about the purpose, and also strengthening my understanding and that I'm only on the beginning of my trauma aware journey, that you think you know something but you actually don't. and I think and staying humble with that. So when I was meeting with Dr Judith Howard, she's the most amazing human, and I don't know if everybody is aware of Judith Howard, but I do have her. Hang on, I think I grabbed some. Yes, I did grab her book, and I've got her other book.
She's done some amazing work in Australia.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She's done amazing work. So she's the author of Trauma Aware Education. That's her most recent book. But the book maybe people are more familiar with is Distressed or Deliberately Defined. That was her first book. But what she's managed to do is she's a professor at Queensland University of Technology, and she has managed to, through her work at a policy level, has managed to mandate that the pre-service teachers that go through Queensland University, they must do trauma-aware education as part of their pre-service teacher training. And so her goal is for that to go nationwide across Australia. That is her plan. That's where her research is sitting. So she has her and I are trying to work on the same here in New Zealand. That's the goal. That's my dream. That's what I would love to happen. And that we are able to work with training our teachers. And I'd like to take it a step further, not just pre-service, but that all teachers in New Zealand existing and pre-service are trained in trauma-aware education. And through that, we are able to lobby and work with government, and this is cross-partisan. I don't care who's in government, because I will work with anybody that will listen to the needs of our tamariki and rangatahi. It doesn't matter to me what political divide. What is important is sustainable change that doesn't matter the election cycle, because I'm sick of election cycles getting in the way of our young people being the best possible human beings that they can be. So we need the right funding. We don't need funding where our beautiful children who get Oars funding get put into groups, and their Oars funding gets shared out, and we share it out, or children who have high and complex needs funding, or children that have ICS funding. We try and divvy it up, and I've done that for years. It's not fair. Children that get funding should get their funding, and then there should be teacher aides in every classroom. It's the only way that we are going to truly have trauma transformative classrooms and teachers can do their job properly. It's the only way.
Absolutely. One of the parallels I want to highlight, Emma, is now we've got the rules and guidelines around prevention of physical restraint. And that has been a few years in the making. And one of the shifts that has happened is finally in the recently reviewed guidelines for the prevention of physical restraint. they've shifted the language in it, and they've put a greater focus on prevention.
Yeah.
They've sort of, highlighted the need to be sort of, trauma aware, and the language has been shifted from challenging behavior to distress behavior.
Mm.
Really fabulous, because
That's cool.
you're actually acknowledging that these are children in distress,
Distress.
children trying to
Yeah.
deliberately sort of
No, in a stress
um,
response. Absolutely. Yeah.
so I'm really excited to see, where this conversation goes. Absolutely support you. Natina is here to support you with this. Taking this conversation further. And I think it'll be absolutely fabulous if we can put something similar where, initial teacher education requires
Yeah.
this training. And, one easy way, honestly, that this can be done is
Mm.
registration for teachers needs to be based on, some sort of training around trauma-informed education,
Totally.
and if we had these little refresher courses happening
Yeah.
every 3 years
Yeah.
for every teacher,
Yeah.
we had these conversations happening on a regular basis in the classroom, with children, in the staff room with, other teachers, in meetings, IEP meetings and
Yeah.
stuff with professionals.
Yeah.
We would see so much of a shift. And one of the reasons why,
Mm.
for me personally, this work is so important is because I see how much it can support inclusion. You can't be exclusive, and you can't be non-inclusive if you are actually trauma informed, because you will know that if you exclude, you're going to cause trauma. If you are
Yeah.
non-inclusive,
No,
you're going to cause
I
trauma.
know. I
If the
know.
child doesn't have that sense of belonging, if you don't create space for them to belong and
Yeah.
be valued, to be heard, seen, alongside their peers, then they are going to experience trauma. So it's so important that we make this shift happen.
You're so right, and that's certainly at the moment the premise of the research that I'll be working alongside Judith with is around belonging, is that premise. And I used some of it. I used some of the Aero report that came out around behaviour
Yes.
recently in March, and around just how I challenged that in some of the information that was in there, and around how we needed to they talked about, because some of the recommendations, was around the behaviorist reward and consequence system. And I talked about a more biologically respectful approach, and emotional regulation being at the core. And
Yeah.
that takes longer and longer to see the evidence of that. And that's why teachers, some teachers, some educators, some parents just want old-fashioned, consequence. We know that works for the majority of kids that don't come from a trauma background, aren't neurodiverse. These days, we're a little bit different, because most of us have some sort of trauma impact. We've all been through COVID. So, it's we've just got to do things differently and be brave for it to take time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, thank you so much, Emma. This has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, listening to you about, your journey, and everything that's in the pipeline. So thank you, thank you, thank you for doing the actual work and carrying it on. Because I know it is a lot of work that you are doing, and I really do hope that we are able to make this shift here.
Oh,
In
it's all of us. It's like I said at the
we
very
need to.
start, it's a
Yeah,
village, and I mean that.
yeah, absolutely. Look, what I'll do is I will close us with a karakia, stop recording, and then we can open the floor if there's,
Magic.
people want
Sounds
to
good.
chat. We can
Great.
do that. Okay, so let's close with the karakia. Thank you, Emma, coming
Kia
along,
ora. Thank you, Fran.
sharing, and all the work that you do. Okay, so karakia
Thank you.
whakarunga, Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie hui e taiki.
Taiki. Kia ora, thank you for
Kia
that.
ora.